what can you expect at each individual stage of intermittent fasting, or even a longer fast? Dr. Jason Fung did an awesome video talking about the 5 stages of fasting, and I don't consume a lot of YouTube content, but I actually watched this video and thought it was very tastefully done. And what I wanted to do is kind of piggyback on that a little bit in a positive way, no malice at all, just positive, what you can expect during each of the 5 phases or stages of intermittent fasting. Let's go ahead and break it down. Now, if you don't know me, I lost 100 pounds with intermittent fasting and a ketogenic lifestyle. So I'm not a doctor, but I've been around the block. I've been doing it for about 10 years, and I spend my life diving into biochemistry and reading research journals and doing what I do. I articulate relatively complex subject matter. So let's kind of just articulate really quick what these 5 stages are, just in a quick nutshell. Okay, the first stage is where you are burning up the food that is still in your system. Okay, so you consume food and you've got food that's in your system and you're burning off the blood glucose from the food that you consumed. Okay, whether you consumed fat, whether you consumed carbs, protein, whatever, you're burning off the food that you consumed. Okay, then you move into the next phase. And during this next phase, you're burning less of the food that you consumed and you're burning more of the stored carbohydrates that are in like your muscle, like muscle glycogen and things like that. Okay, this is predominantly what is called an AMPK state. We'll jump back to this, of course. Okay, then you move into the third state where your body is sort of in between burning its own stored fuel and ketosis, which is also still going to burn its own stored fuel. It's just a slightly different mechanism. This is called the gluconeogenesis phase. And again, Dr. Jason Fung broke it down very nicely in his video, but essentially it's where your body is kind of wondering what's going on, so it starts breaking down other tissues. Sometimes protein, but a lot of times it's not in the way that you think. You're not just breaking down muscle tissue. You usually have some preservation mechanisms in place because human growth hormone elevates so much, sort of protecting you from just breaking down your muscle. But you also have a high degree of autophagy that kind of starts to kick in at this point. Then the next phase is the phase that everybody wants with fasting, but unfortunately you only really get it if you're fasting for beyond like 16, 20 hours, and that's the deeper ketosis stage of fasting. And that's where you start to feel really, really good, where you start to get kind of the muscle preservation effects, where you get some of the mental effects because the brain can operate on ketones. Now, the 5th stage is a little bit more of a deeper ketosis, like muscle preservation stage that Dr. Jason Fung talks about. So let's jump back to stage 1 here for just a second, or phase 1, and talk about what you can expect to feel during that period of time. But hey, after this video, I do want you to check out my friends over at Thrive Market. They're an online membership-based grocery store. So if you're doing keto, you're doing fasting, you're looking for foods to eat during your eating period, stuff like that, highly, highly recommend them. Okay, there is a link down below. So what it is you go log on, you can sort by diet category, you can get your food, like figure it out, you put it in your shopping cart, and then it gets delivered to your doorstep within a couple of days, and you're set. And a lot of times it's more economical in the grocery store because you're not having to drive to the grocery store, but their prices are super competitive as well. They've been a sponsor of this channel for years. I thoroughly support them, so I recommend you check them out. Again, that link is down below in the description after this video. Okay, so with phase 1, when you're burning the food that you already consumed, it's pretty cut and dry. Okay, a lot of times during this period is when you're going to feel the most hungry. And why do I say that? Well, because right now, all your signals within your body are commanding like various things. You are going to this point where you are burning off the fuel that you consumed, and when you start getting to the bottom of that barrel, the body's gonna say, oh, okay, well, the food that you ate is kind of running out, so you need to eat again. So hunger signals kind of start going through the roof a little bit here. And a lot of times when people intermittent fast, they are starting their fast in the evening time. They eat their dinner and then they go to bed. So a lot of times they don't necessarily feel this signal per se because they could be asleep, but you might even find yourself occasionally waking up and being hungry or whatever. But the reality is, you're not usually feeling this signal, but if you were to start at a different time of day, you'd probably be pretty aware of it. So as this happens, this is the time where you might want to consider burning off some of this fuel a little bit faster. Okay, so if you already ate a meal, going for a walk and burning some of that glucose that's circulating through your bloodstream could get you into stage 2 a little bit faster. Because what's happening is you've consumed food and that's provided your body and your tissue with blood glucose. And whether you are doing keto or not, again, cells like your brain, like your liver cells, like your muscle cells, they all use glucose and they continue to use glucose, okay? So if you can at least do a mild activity, you can burn through that food glucose a little bit faster. Then you move into the second stage, which candidly is my favorite stage, because I feel like this is where I just feel really good in this second stage. What this second stage is where your body is starting to upregulate something called AMPK. AMPK is the energy sensor within your body, and it recognizes you've moved out of stage one. It says, wait a minute, there's no food here. So we need to start creating food or liberating food from the fat tissues, or we need to liberate food from the glycogen stores. This is where the difference between someone that is fat adapted or not fat adapted could come into play. Someone that is not fat adapted, they're likely to really rip through their glycogen stores, their stored carbohydrates in their muscles, very fast because their body doesn't know how to use fats just yet. Someone that is fat adapted, and I'll just use myself as an example since I've been doing keto and fasting for 10 years, I'm very fat adapted. So during this second phase where the energy demand switch is on, well, I actually feel pretty good because it's when my body starts to kickstart all those fatty acids to get liberated. And if you haven't noticed already, with fasting, with keto, you feel really good in the brain because fats are a tremendous fuel and ketones are a tremendous fuel for the brain, but fats are just a very efficient fuel source for the body anyway. So during this AMPK phase, or phase 2, you can expect to feel a little bit hungry, but a lot of times you feel less hungry in phase 2 than you do in phase 1, because now your body is, to some degree, satiated by its own liberation of fuel. So again, that AMPK tells the brain, hey man, we don't have any food. You better start just releasing some carbohydrates and stuff. So this phase usually goes until, again, depending on how fat adapted you are, anywhere from 12, 16-ish hours. And in Dr. Jason Fung's video, he kind of broke that down. And I've shown that chart before too, saying like the benefits of fasting, like the true benefits, they start at like 16 hours. Because at 16 hours, that's when insulin levels get really low, and that's when AMPK starts to kind of go back down because your body is getting into equilibrium. So what do you do and how do you get the most out of this stage 2? Well, when your body's using glycogen and it's trying to burn through it, one of the better things that you could do is do some mild resistance training during this phase. This is because resistance training is going to allow you to kind of stimulate the utilization of glucose even a little bit better. You may not be using a whole lot of fats just yet, and you kind of need to get your body conditioned to that. So I would say moderate resistance training or even a slight jog is going to be good there. Then we move into phase 3, which is a really cool phase, but it's kind of a transitional, kind of like weird phase. What happens is, let's just say at 16 hours, your insulin levels get really low, okay? And that is a good thing in this particular case because when our insulin levels are low, our glucagon levels are high. So we're at kind of a peak of fat burning at this point because we have AMPK levels that are now dropping. And what I mean by that is, the AMPK went up originally because remember, it's the sensor and it tells the brain, we're starving, we need fuel, okay? So it liberates fuel. But now the body has liberated enough fuel that the cells are satiated. Your stomach might not be, but your cells have what they need. The AMPK allowed the release of this fuel. So now the cells are like, I'm satisfied. Okay, so now they're in a rhythm, right? But your insulin levels are so low because you haven't been eating, and your glucagon levels are so high, and glucagon is a hormone that is largely associated with the liberation of fat. It's also associated with what's called hormone-sensitive lipase, all these different processes that are associated with, you guessed it, more fat burning. So the 16 to sort of like 24-hour period is my personal favorite period. You have a small amount of ketones, which we'll talk about in a second, but really what's happening is a lot of gluconeogenesis during this phase. Gluconeogenesis is where your body takes other energy substrates to create fuel. What happens is it gets in a heavy glucose demand. So you ran out of glycogen. During phase 2, you had plenty of glycogen that was being released from your muscles and from your liver, ultimately, really the liver, the main thing. But once the glycogen is drained, and in a fat-adapted individual, mind you, it's different because your body shifts into gear a little bit sooner, but let's put that aside for now. When your body runs out of that glycogen, it kind of panics a little bit, okay? And it says, well, what do we run on next? Well, then the liver says, well, if you give me some of these other substrates, proteins, amino acids, glycerol backbones, things like that, which I'll explain in a second, I can create glucose for you because the body needs glucose. Okay, the brain still needs glucose. Your cells need glucose. The body runs on it. The heart, the liver, it all needs glucose. If your blood sugar went to 0, you'd drop dead, right? We've talked about that many times in my videos. So once that demand for glucose is really high and you don't have glycogen, the body has no choice but to kind of upregulate gluconeogenesis. Now, the benefit here and the reason that I like this stage so much is because people think that gluconeogenesis and creating glucose only comes from breaking down your muscle. Not the case, okay? In fact, if you look at some of the research, it indicates that a lot of the glucose is created from what is called the glycerol backbone. So when you liberate fats, when your body says, oh, we're releasing fats for fuel, we're releasing free fatty acids, the free fatty acids are bound to what is called glycerol. And the free fatty acids then circulate and they go to the cells and get used as fuel, okay? It's called beta oxidation. The cells know how to use that fat as a fuel source. So then what ends up happening is you're left with this glycerol backbone. Basically, the body cleaves it off. Well, glycerol doesn't just get excreted. Glycerol goes to the liver and is a substrate that is used to create glucose. So then the liver knows how to create this component, this part of fat, a triglyceride, this part of it, and turn it into a sugar, turn it into glucose. Well, this is phenomenal because the more that that process gets upregulated, there's a double demand for fat. Think about it. The cells in your muscles want the free fatty acids and the liver wants the glycerol backbone. So you got two things barking at your body saying, give me fat, because the liver can make sugar from it and the muscle can use it as energy. It's tremendous, right? It's everything that we would want. So during this phase, what will you feel like? Like, what can you expect? Well, you can actually expect to get a little bit thirsty. Now, that's one thing that happens a lot during this time. Okay, a lot of times by now, your insulin levels have dropped so much that you're excreting a lot of extra water. And along with that, you're excreting minerals. So I usually recommend around this time, it might not be a bad idea to bring some electrolytes into the mix. Okay, usually just, a small amount, maybe a little bit of sodium, potassium, magnesium, just to kind of balance you out. But I don't want to make this a total how-to video. I want this to be like what you expect in the different stages. And to get a little bit more out of this stage, remember, your body right now is starting to utilize fats a little bit better. And the next phase is where you're using ketones more. If you want to expedite getting into that phase a little bit faster and getting into kind of the golden era of your fasting period, well, then you're probably going to want to go out and go for like a gentle walk. Why is that? Walking isn't demanding a lot of glucose. Walking is demanding a lot of fat. It's a slow process and it's aerobic. And every sense of the word with aerobic means with oxygen. So when you're exercising, if you're going for like a low intensity walk, your body has enough time to take oxygen and create energy with it. Now, when it does that, it combines it with fatty acids. That's an abbreviation and an oversimplification, but basically when you have activity that is low and slow enough to utilize oxygen, it's aerobic, and that uses fat. But the moment that you start getting more intense, you can't keep up with it. Your breath, your oxygen consumption cannot keep up with the fact that you are trying to create more energy. Okay, so your body says, well, forget it. I can't use oxygen because that process is too slow. So let's start creating energy through for lack of a better term, artificial process utilizing carbohydrates. It's quicker, it's faster, and to some degree it's more effective, but it uses glycogen, uses glucose, it doesn't use fat. We don't really want to go into that stage too much. If you're transitioning, it's a great time between 16, 20 hours or so to just go for a gentle walk and get more fats liberated. But now, if you move into stage 4 is where you have, or phase 4, we can call it that. This is where your body says, all right, we need to start producing ketones because now we're getting to a point where clearly this person's not going to eat and we need to go into muscle preservation mode and we need to go into starvation mode. This is where the brain says, you know what, I'm a little concerned that I'm not going to have enough glucose here, so let me sort of flip this switch so that I can also run on ketones, because that's what's interesting. The brain cannot run on fats. Your muscle, your heart, your liver, that can run on fats. The brain can't run on straight fats. They can't get through the blood-brain barrier. So up until this point, your brain has been starting to go, uh-oh, what's going on here, right? And then after the ketones start getting produced, then the brain says, oh, cool, I can use this glucose that's available, but I can also use these ketones. So then you have a backup source of fuel, and there's certain cells within your brain that like ketones more. It's just kind of the natural affinity for them. So during this phase, which generally occurs anywhere from like 20 to 28 hours, well, I mean, in some people, again, if you're fat adapted, it happens sooner, you start feeling really good. You start having signals that actually make you less hungry, because ketones themselves are very leucine sparing, so they preserve muscle, but they're also, beta hydroxybutyrate is very appetite suppressing. So you actually, in a weird way, become very, very efficient, and you don't get hungry anymore. It's your body's sort of natural way of saying, okay, well, we need to make sure that you're efficient so that you can go out and you can provide food for yourself. And when you get into that quote unquote starvation mode, a lot of energy gets shunted to your brain, because from an evolutionary perspective, what is our best chance of survival? Our best chance of survival as humans is being able to use our brain. Okay, a lion, it might be using their power. A cheetah, it's using their speed. I mean, cheetahs are smart too. They're probably smarter than us, candidly. But the point is we have a lot of frontal lobe, we have a lot of logic, and it's a survival mechanism for us to have more energy in the brain. So you see a lot of people that are looking for cognitive boosts and things like that. They like to do longer fasts because they feel really good doing that. Well, the benefit is, yes, you get that happening, but the more longer fasts that you do over time, you actually can get to that stage sooner, because your body starts recognizing it as fat adaptation. So for me, I get to that sort of stage 4 after like 18, 20 hours, whereas someone that's newer to fasting might not actually get to that efficient stage 4 until later on in their fast. But it seems the opposite. It seems like you would get hungry and get the survival effects of a fast much sooner, but it's actually later because you have less adaptation. This is also the stage in which a lot of autophagy occurs. Autophagy is sort of the cellular recycling that occurs within fasting. So it's a very restorative phase, because your body's less about being shocked and scared, and it's more about coming into its own and getting efficient with being in ketosis and being in a fast. And then lastly, if we touch on stage 5, that's what Dr. Jason Fung talks about as being sort of this protein preservation. Like, yes, at that point you do have a pretty significant increase in human growth hormone, pretty significant increase in, again, beta hydroxybutyrate, so very, very muscle sparing. But you also, you're just getting deeper into a fast in general. And once you reach a certain point over like 30, 36 hours, you can expect some muscle protein breakdown to occur. So what I would recommend if you're doing longer fasts is to have a periodic stimulation of mTOR. What the heck does that mean? Thomas, you sound crazy. So mTOR is the growth signal, the anabolic signal within our body. Fasting is largely very non-growth signal. It's very opposite. It's very catabolic. You're breaking stuff down in a way to become more efficient. But if you occasionally lift some weights and do not even anything crazy intense, but put load on your muscle during a later stage of a fast, you can actually have what is called the localized stimulation of mTOR, meaning your muscles receive a signal that, oh, he's still using us. So don't waste the muscle. It'll send a signal to the brain saying, wait, no, he's using this. Remember, the body's all about efficiency at this point in time. So if it recognizes that something is being used, it's going to deem it as necessary for survival. If it's not being used, that might be the first place where the body starts to say, okay, we gotta go survival of the fittest, and we gotta lean into what we need here. This guy's not using his legs, he's only using his arms. I mean, you kind of get the point. So during this phase, you can expect to kind of lose some sleep because it becomes kind of stressful. It becomes a big adrenaline spike, a big noradrenaline spike. And there's some interesting research that shows that people that go on a 3 or 4 day fast kind of as an anomaly, when they start doing longer fasts, it actually increases their metabolism. It doesn't decrease because their body is in such an acute stressor and such an acute shock that it triggers an adrenaline response that quite honestly liberates more fat, but it can also make it so it's hard to sleep and trigger some other issues there. So I have plenty of other videos that break down kind of like how to fast, what to do with that, but I wanted to break down these stages, and I wanted to give a nod to Dr. Jason Fung because I thought it was a well done video, but I wanted to expand a little bit more and give people a little bit more information from my experience. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.